Not me.
I don't think I ever told you this story before, but there was a time about a year or so ago when I was looking for a single disc playing, I don't know, Discman, whatever you call them, whatever they're
Right.
called. Why? I have all of my music on various kinds of digital formats now, and I've ripped all these hundreds of discs of my favorite music, and I have that available. But the truth is, I still love playing the discs, and I love playing them because what I really love is taking out the albums and reading the liner notes while I'm listening to the music. And you can't do that if you have just a digital format. And also, I like riffling. I through books, let's say, to look for my underlines, and I like looking at my shelf and scanning my shelf for the book titles and the disc titles and so on. Anyway, I went into this kind of high-tech electrical appliance store, and I asked someone who was a very nice service person uh, to help me. And he said, "What can I do for you?" And I said, "I'm looking for something that will play a CD." And he showed me all of these high-tech things. And I said, "No, I'm looking for something that will actually play a single CD." And he looked at me and he said, "You'll have to go to Best Buy." Just like that. Like somehow coordinate with my need to hear a disc was some kind of deficiency in my hearing. It made this assumption. And you'll have to go to Best Buy. Turns out I really didn't have to go to Best Buy because there are some off-brands that are made that even have Bluetooth connections where maybe somebody has anticipated my need. Anyway, enough offloading. Hope everybody's well, and I'm ready to start whenever you're ready to start. You just give us the high sign here, Jenna. Oh, we're already up and running.
Absolutely.
We're already on. This is already being recorded for the ages. Oh my. Well, that's actually probably better because it allows me to get over my my jitters. Sabina went into the other room. She's going to be on another set this evening, just because we set this one up so that that I could sit here. We have some different lights, and we have, thanks to Jenna, a different mic system. And in this room, it looks a bit like a studio from my point of view. That's really nice. The poem that I want to share with you this evening is really one of my favorite poems by Amichai. And it says something very deep about what he tries to do as a poet. And I think it also says something very deep and important about personal journeys, about the personal journey that is also the personal odyssey, let's say. And as I say odyssey, I'm thinking yet about another work that I would like to put in front of you. Not the Odyssey of Homer, but the Odyssey, or an Odyssey, I believe is what Daniel Mendelbaum. I can tell you in just a moment. Hold on, don't go away.
Mendelssohn.
Excuse me, I was thinking of someone else. This is Daniel Mendelssohn. Daniel Mendelssohn, who's a professor of classics at Baird College. Daniel Mendelssohn wrote a book called An Odyssey, which is about an undergraduate seminar that he taught about Homer's Odyssey, but his father enrolled in the course. And it becomes a book about his journeying with his father and his father's life journey and the journeys that they take together, and the personal stories that span centuries intertwine and they become one gigantic odyssey with all kinds of lovely, charming, poignant twists and turns. An Odyssey by Daniel Mendelssohn, professor of classics. the way in which a personal story becomes so deep that it deepens not only into itself, but beyond itself, and it becomes a classic story. It becomes a story of an important inner search, which somehow masquerades as, and then becomes an outer search as well. It goes from the inner soul to the top of Mount Sinai, and that is where Amichai's poem takes us. And that's part of what makes it, I want to say, such a deep and probing story about personal journeys, and such a deep and probing story about what he wants to say in his poetry. He's interested in poetry, in the poem becoming the most personal that it can be, and learning, as Carl Rogers famously taught, that the most personal is the most general. You tell a personal story and everyone's going to think that you're talking about them. It's something important that I can share with you now, my bag of tricks from being a rabbi all of those years in a pulpit circumstance, that to try to create some kind of an abstraction, a story that is an abstract, that tries to piece together, like an old Doers ad from Time magazine, Gary Player's hips and Jack Nicklaus's eye and Arnold Palmer's hands and Gene Saracen's shoulders and so on, to make the perfect golf swing. Try to do that and you're not going to have anything. But that's not what you need. The abstraction is not what you need. What you need is a personal story that has depth and that has coherence. And when you tell a personal story, people will say, as they said to me for years, "Rabbi, how did you know? You were talking right to me." Amichai does it time and time and time again. But here, that very personal search that deepens into an odyssey that becomes everybody's story, a personal epic that becomes the epic stance of the great hero of the sacred story, converges for us with the theme of Sinai, which is something that for the last number of weeks, well, since we really started on my birthday, we have been discussing. So we can go to the poem, and I have now, it seems, conquered what it means to, or the narcissistic impulse of looking at my own face, which is front and center and big on the screen. Don't you find that with Zoom? I do, and I'm always, if I'm in the gallery view or on the side or wherever it is, I'm always looking to see, well, what do I look like? What do I look like? And now, in the midst of chemotherapy, as I have lost a bunch of hair, not that terribly much. I mean, it's okay. It's okay. It's a kind of interesting look. For those of you who know her, it's a sort of an Anne Shachtman look. But I've now, even now that I've conquered the impulse to stare right at myself, I think we ought to put the poem on the screen so we can see how it is that Amichai begins, and let him take us through the next part of the hour. I think, Jenna, the bottom of the page, if we could just make that somehow bigger. We don't really need the Hebrew for now. I'm not sure how much we're going to use it, but it's good to have it there. All right. Oh, cute. Zoom on Zoom. Nice. I didn't mean to make you work this hard. Weren't you even curious to see what 3,200 times meant? No? Okay, that's good. Moses, our teacher, only once saw the face of God and forgot. He did not want to see the wilderness, not even the promised land. but only the face of God. He struck the rock in the fury of his longings. He went up and down Mount Sinai. He shattered the 2 tablets of the covenant and made a golden calf. He searched in fire and in smoke, but he remembered only the strong hand of God and his outstretched arm, not his face. Just like someone who wants to remember the face of a loved one, but cannot. He made himself a composite sketch from the face of God and from the burning bush and from the face of Pharaoh's daughter who leaned over him when he was an infant in the basket. And he distributed the picture to all the tribes of Israel and throughout the wilderness. But no one had seen and no one recognized. And only at the end of his life on Mount Nebo did he see and die by a kiss from the face of God. This book, written in the last 10 years or so of Amichai's life, published in his last book, Patuach Sagur Patuach, Open, Closed, Open, got my attention very early on. I spent many months reading this poem almost exclusively and just letting it enter, just seep into my pores and writing a little bit about it with the hospitality of the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem. Well, I wonder what the poem does for you and where it is that we should start. Let's see. Well, perhaps starting at the beginning is not a bad idea now that you've heard it one time. I'll read it 2 or 3 more times during the course of our hour together. But just to start, Moses, our teacher, only once saw the face of God and forgot. Ad kan, just there. What is that doing for you? Moses, our teacher, who talks like that? And when did Moses see the face of God? Amichai says it with all of the authority that he can muster. It's a rabbinic term, our teacher. Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses, our teacher. Moshe Rabbeinu. And with that little phrase, he identifies his audience in a unique way. Of course, the poem, just like the territory of Mount Sinai, according to the Midrash, is hefker. It's free and open to everybody to come. And anybody who heard the Torah being given who wanted to receive it could receive it. That's the import of the Midrash. It is free and open territory to say, Moses, our teacher. Perhaps there are a lot of people who claim Moses as their teacher. Indeed, we know that that's the case, many religious traditions. But there is a specific audience that's being claimed here. There are people on the inside who understand what Moses, our teacher, means to the circle of those who use rabbinic language. Moses, our teacher, only once saw the face of God and forgot. And again, I renew the question. When did he see the face of God?
On Sinai.
Yes, he did see it, as it happens.
Back of God, anyway.
It was Sinai, but it wasn't the Sinai moment of the revelation that we're talking about.
Maybe
There's
the
another
burning,
moment. Pardon me?
maybe the burning bush.
The which?
The burning bush.
The burning bush, which seems to have been on Sinai. Yes, which seems to have been on Sinai. During that narrative, if you were to go back and reread that narrative, I hope you will, it's essential to the Midrash project. When I was learning Midrash with the great Judah Golden of blessed memory, you dared not show up in his Midrash seminar at Penn without having a Bible in hand. If you didn't have a Bible, he sent you to the stacks of the library where we met in order to get a Bible. Otherwise, you were not allowed entry. You could bring the Midrash text, you could even have it memorized, but you had to have a Bible in your hand because you had to be able to interlace the rabbinic story with the biblical story. And if you read the biblical story at the beginning, the prologue, the commissioning of Moses, you find at one moment that God says to Moses, "This will be a sign to you that you will bring these people, your people, back to this mountain where they will worship me, back to this mountain." And here is Moses standing in front of a bush that's burning, that's not burning up, which in Hebrew is called, anybody remember the word? It's called a sneh. 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 Sinai. It's more than likely the same word. Moses, our teacher, only once saw the face of God. And do you remember that moment now? So Harold, thanks for getting us off on the right foot or on the right geography.
It's his third visit. Ask for forgiveness.
His third visit. He asks for forgiveness of God where?
On Mount Sinai.
On Mount Sinai. Yes. All right. And do you remember the scene where he actually is staring right at that bush? It's it's an extraordinary scene. If you try to make the movie version of it, he gets captured by the vision of this bush that's burning and flickering, and he's watching it burn. And it's burning, but it's not burning up, apparently. It doesn't look like it's burning up. And it has really captured his attention. And in my movie version of it, he's circling around this bush. He's looking for the right vantage point, the place where he can stop, maybe take a photograph. Although there's no internet service out there, I don't suppose, but he'll save the photograph for another time. But what do you want to have in the background when you take that picture? You maybe want to just shape it in exactly the right way. Or how do you want to take it into memory? Only in a particular way. So in my movie version, he's pacing around looking at this bush that's burning but isn't burning up. And then he has a conversation. The bush says, "Moses," or a voice in the bush says, "Moses, in effect, stop pacing, stay where you are. Don't come any closer. For the ground on which you are standing is sacred ground." And then the voice identifies itself as being the voice of God, the God of his father. And what does Moses do then? Am I jogging your memory sufficiently?
Takes off his shoes, among other things.
Yeah, take off your shoes. Yes, he follows that instruction. But when he hears the voice, and when he hears the voice identify itself as being God's voice, he hides his face.
Right.
Vayaster et panav. He hid his face. Why? Because he was afraid to look at the face of God. He was afraid to look at the face of God because that's just not something that one did. One didn't gaze at the face languidly, luxuriously, wantonly, curiously at the face of the deity or the face of the sovereign. Don't look at the king or the queen. Lower your eyes. Perhaps the king or the queen would even sit behind a veil, but you don't engage, you don't look at the king unless the king raises your face, Vayisa panav, or raises his face upon you, as we say in that blessing that Aaron gives the people of Israel. This is a sign of God's grace to actually gaze at the face. Moses sees the face of God there and is frightened and will not look at it and closes his eyes. And it's right there in that moment that Amichai's search begins, or that his poem begins. And following hard and fast on that moment, the recollection of the newly commissioned prophet, the devotee, the one who has to maintain that sense of ferocity and dedication to the task. God commissioned me to do this. This ever-changing, flaming, unfeatured, multi-featured face before which I closed my eyes. Once upon a time, I was teaching this to 8th graders, and an 8th grader said to me, not the poem, but the Bible story. And we started to talk about why Moses closed his eyes and was afraid to look at God's face. And this 8th grader raised his hand with a kind of passion that I've since associated with Moses in this moment. And he said with such firmness and assurity, I know why Moses wouldn't look at God, why he hid his face. And I asked, why? And my student said, it was his way of saying, please leave me with my dreams. If I go down into Egypt and the people say to me there, what did he look like? And I say, he looked like a fiery dragon with 8 tongues and 5 eyes and so on. They're going to say to me, no, that's not it. But if I say to them, I don't know, I was too frightened to look, they're going to believe me. That's an image that they're going to get. So here's Moses, who really wants to remember and needs to remember from that moment, once he closes his eyes and then steps away from the bush that's burning, but isn't burning up. From that moment onward, how steeled he would be by a vision of that face, but he hasn't got it. And in the first line of Amichai's poem, we don't know that he hasn't got it because the first line doesn't tell us. The drop-off comes, the sheer, steep, plummeting drop-off comes between the first line and the second. Moses, our teacher, only once saw the face of God and forgot. Boom! How about only once saw the face of God, and that was enough. It was a vision that kept him going forever and ever. I really want to see you. And I saw you, and that was the culmination of my career. And now I don't really need terribly much else. But that's line 1. Moses, our teacher, only once saw the face of God, and he wasn't entitled to twice or something like this. No. Moses, our teacher, only once saw the face of God and forgot. And then comes this extraordinary journey, the epic, down into Egypt and out and across the split parts of the sea and past the clutter of the plagues and through the quail and the hail and the manna and all of the stuff. And he did not want to see the wilderness. Moses didn't give a damn. He didn't want to see the wilderness, not even the promised land. The only thing he wanted to see was the face of God. And whenever there was a promise or even a hint of that, and he went to the place where the hint might be. And here again, I'd call your attention to 2 biblical stories. You can find them. I don't have the citations for you right at the moment. Although in light of the fact that this is being recorded, I could well have found them for you and sent them to you, or at least read them into the record right now. But no matter, it's better for your midrashic impulses to look it up. Look up the 2 stories of Moses and the rock, and you'll find that in the second story, God promises to be there when Moses goes out publicly to that rock to which he's supposed to speak. But instead, he, in his fury, he strikes it. God promises to actually be there. But Moses got there, and apparently, at least Amichai seems to think, he struck the rock in the fury of his longings. Maybe God just didn't show up, or not in a way that faced him clearly enough. He didn't recognize, he didn't see what he was looking for. Not the wilderness, not the promised land, but only the face of God. And he struck the rock in the fury of his longings. And he went up and down Sinai. To do what? Why did you think he went up and down Mount Sinai?
To get the 10 Commandments.
Absolutely. And Amichai would say, you see,
Wrong.
here's the outer story. This is the epic outer story. You see Charlton Heston going up the mountain. But how about inside? He went up and down Mount Sinai, but Moses wants to say, dear reader, that's not what he was looking for.
He was looking to see God's face again.
He's looking for the face. He's always looking for the face.
Right.
And he shattered the 2 tablets of the covenant and made a golden calf. He searched in fire and in smoke. That's a lot. Is it useful? Is it challenging? Is it helpful? Is it hard?
He didn't make the golden calf, though.
He didn't make the golden calf.
Yeah, I wonder if I read
His
that
brother
right.
did. So
Yeah.
I think it's a familial connection there.
He did not make the golden calf. But Amichai is speaking to a readership that understands that he didn't make the golden calf. He's speaking to a readership who understands what Moshe Rabbeinu means. Oh, thank you, Adina.
Adina has the answer.
Yeah, the second story in Numbers chapter 20, you will find it. He didn't make the golden calf. And Amichai is speaking to a readership that knows that he did not make the golden calf. And he's not, so we can't say that he's trying to undermine his own credibility or to rewrite history. Well, we can defer that for a moment. He searched in fire and in smoke. Plenty of that in that story of Revelation, both in Exodus chapter 19 and also in Deuteronomy chapters 4 and 5. He searched in fire and in smoke, but he remembered only the strong hand of God and his outstretched arm. Imagery that we know. Oh, yeah. Hand, arm, that we get. We get that in the sacred story itself at the splitting of the sea. And people who are watching the sea being split actually say, according to what Moses sings in his song, Ze Eli ve'alnevehu, this is my God. And for the rabbis, whenever they see the word this in the Torah in such a fashion, they think it means pointing. It's like it's a stage direction. They're pointing, this is my God. This is divine presence. Maybe not face, but it's presence as much as we get to see reaching into the world, hand and arm. He's looking for the face in all of these epic ways, but he remembered only what distilled itself into the written word. He remembered only the strong hand of God and his outstretched arm, not his face. Just like someone who wants to remember the face of a loved one, but cannot.
This is Bernie. Those sentences are connected by the word rock only, because in the first sentence it says, only once saw the face of God and forgot. And then it says, and he remembered only the strong hand of God and his outstretched arm. And then in the end it says, and only at the end of his life on Mount Nebo did he see and die by a kiss from the face of God.
Yes. And thank you. Good eye. And very appropriate. These are well-chosen words by the poet who, by a poet who takes his place as one who does not waste any words. Thank you for that, and thank you for threading the connection between one sentence and the next, and also the beginning and the end.
Rabbi,
Yes,
Giselle.
I see, Giselle. You're
Hi.
looking very rabbinical.
Oh, not quite yet.
Well, Giselle is a new rabbinical student accepted at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and will begin her formal studies this coming semester. And I don't know whether they have a celebration planned yet, because they don't know how lucky they are.
Oh,
But
yeah.
there are plenty of people to call. And I was speaking with Rabbi Graber about this just the other day, and telling him, although he doesn't really know it, but we as a community have sent 8 people to rabbinical school over the years. Not all of them members of Bethel, but members of the community who had something to do with Bethel and its education programs and its chavruta learning and its study groups and its midrash. And this is quite a record, especially for a small community in the South. And we're just all thrilled.
Yeah.
Now, I hope I haven't distracted you too much.
No, you definitely have been like a great mentor. And even though I'm moving this Sunday, I will keep coming to this class via Zoom. That's the benefit of Zoom. So,
Oh, good.
so I will be present.
Oh,
So
good.
what I wanted to say is like the story where it says that Moshe saw God panim el panim. And then after that, it says that, no one can see God and live. And like few verses after that. So it seems like what he forgets is the face, but what he remember is the experience of
Yes.
seeing God. And that's the same thing with like everything else that he remembers later on in life. It's the legacy of a person or of God, not just the face. So the face, can be irrelevant, but what you learn from someone or like the legacy of God, it's what you will remember. Everything
Yes.
you might forget.
Thank you. Thank you. We could spend a lot of time. We could spend a year just learning about face. Just studying the way in which face and faces and facing and facets are used in the literature of the Torah and beyond, and what it means to be able to see the face or not see the face, or to look somebody in the face in rabbinic literature, or to avert the face. And you have it here. Thank you, Giselle. And you've also reminded us that lurking at the very end of this poem, or waiting for us at the end of this poem, is the fact that he does see the face one more time, and it's a moment when he dies. And he dies with a kiss, which is a rabbinic image that we can talk about and see the way in which Amichai has shaped it from the biblical and the rabbinic story. But you've also helped us to see, if we want to shuttle back between the story, which is the surface story, not superficial, but the surface story of Moses and his search, and the inner story of a person and a person's life. What do you face up to? What do you need to put together for yourself? What's the thing that you wish you could remember more completely and can't? What's the face? What's the coherence? The coherency, not a real word, I don't think, but I like the way it sounds, that you would love to be able to put together. That's what Moses is looking for, and at the end of his life we'll find once again, we know, because we've already read the poem. And now the poet takes a break. He does not break the stanza. This is all one stanza. But he breaks from what we know so far of the Bible story itself, and goes to some images that that break a time barrier in a certain way and are classic Amichai. But before we do it, let me read the poem one more time, just gathering together with one deep breath, perhaps, the way in which the poem has unfolded so far, and then move it forward just a little bit. Moses, our teacher, only once saw the face of God and forgot. He did not want to see the wilderness, not even the promised land, but only the face of God. He struck the rock in the fury of his longings. He went up and down Mount Sinai. He shattered the 2 tablets of the covenant and made a golden calf. He searched in fire and in smoke, but he remembered only the strong hand of God and his outstretched arm, not his face. Just like someone who wants to remember the face of a loved one, but cannot. He made himself a composite sketch from the face of God and from the burning bush and from the face of Pharaoh's daughter who leaned over him when he was an infant in the basket. And he distributed the picture to all the tribes of Israel and throughout the wilderness. But no one had seen and no one recognized. And only at the end of his life on Mount Nebo did he see and die by a kiss from the face of God. You noticed the break that he made between an ancient century and a modern time in this classic Amichai way. Moses made himself a composite sketch. Well, how are you going to find him? How about if we hang up posters? He made himself a composite sketch, a klasteron, which in modern Hebrew is a word that means a composite sketch. It means a police sketch. It means a mug, not a mug shot, because that's a photograph, but it means a police sketch. Well, what exactly did the subject look like? Who are you looking to find? Well, I don't know. It looked sort of like a bush that was burning up, thinking about my 8th grade student. And sort of like this woman who leaned over me when I was an infant. Can you make a composite sketch of those things? He made himself a composite sketch from the face of God and from the burning bush. I left that out, sorry. And from the face of Pharaoh's daughter who leaned over him when he was an infant in the basket.
I love those 2 images. It's Sabina, your wife, by the way, in the other room.
That's Sabina. Yeah,
that one.
Yeah.
I love the 2 images that he used. This god of the burning bush, this monster that you were talking about with 11 tongues and horns and all these things, and very scary. And then this delicate, amazing, intimate picture of Pharaoh's daughter, this woman, this mother-like figure to him, who obviously he can't even possibly remember from that particular scene as an infant. But that coming together of this fierce, godly sense plus this motherly, very feminine, the 2 things together, the sketch, those are, as Giselle was saying, those are experiences that he had. And they're both together.
Thank you. Talk about composite. Whatever God's face looked like, it looked at least a little bit like Pharaoh's daughter. It looked a little bit like his stepmother. It looked a little bit like that burning bush.
I'm wondering whether Pharaoh's daughter actually gave him a kiss at some point. The kiss almost of life, whereas at the end of his life, God gave him the kiss of death.
Yeah. Well, it's a nice way of extending the image of the poem back into the Bible story. And if you were making a movie or a play of it, you might well have the Pharaoh's daughter leaning over him and comforting the infant with a kiss.
Well, Rabbi, you
Yeah.
made mention of Carl Rogers, the psychoanalyst,
Yes.
and you got me thinking here, thanks to Sibby's comment. You know, there's such a thing as a screen memory, and I was just talking about this with a resident this morning. And a screen memory is your very earliest memory, and it's often not like other memories. It's you can't even be sure it isn't a dream or that you didn't have it later and you've reflected it back to those early days. But that image of Pharaoh's daughter leaning over him when he's a very little infant in a basket. And the thing about a screen memory is that, again, it's not a memory. It's something that's seared into you. And it's very important. It links to all kinds of essential things. And yet you can't really tell what it is because it's so early. It's so pre-verbal. You know, it has a kind of life of its own. And I wonder if part of what Amichai is saying as a poet is that there are certain images, intimate images, that are beyond words, beyond thought, that are just seared into you. And kind of like Sibby was saying before, that they're kind of life and death. They're sort of the alpha and omega of who and what you are.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And no wonder nobody else has seen and that nobody's able to recognize from this perplexing drawing that he has tried so hard to configure. And now the things that I want to tell you are, or suggest to you, are stacking up like cordwood in my head. One of them is that part of his search seems to be a search through I want to say, plastic arts or through material things, you know. He makes he's making this drawing here. He's got to figure this out. He's making a drawing here. He has made a golden calf before this. I suggested to you then that he is not assuming, he is not trying to rewrite biblical history, and he knows darn well that Moses didn't make that calf. But perhaps Moses made a calf. And here you might flash to Close Encounters, you know, and have Richard Dreyfuss trying to figure out what the hell that mountain actually looked like. And then, do you remember what he does in his frustrations, let's say in the fury of his longings, where he takes his hands and he goes, rah, like this, and he rips the top of the mountain off, and that's what he's looking for. Or that most closely approximates what he's looking for. So here's Moses, who's he's doing things, and he's engaging in these epic searches, and some divine hand is writing this down, or is transcribing it. You know, some embedded divine CNN crew is writing this down. This is the great epic of Moses ascending the mountain to get the law and to bring it down, to get the Torah and to bring it down to the people of Israel. Screw that. That's not what he's doing. That's not what he's trying to do. He's trying to reclaim this thing. He's trying to recapture this thing. I don't know what he thinks about the people. I don't even know how loudly I'm speaking. Am I blowing you out of the water here? I've never used this microphone before. I'm sorry. My passion sort of got in the way here. I'll find out when I listen to the. He's trying all these things, and they're not working. So that's one thing that I wanted to tell you. Another thing that I wanted to tell you, which I want to tell you before we get to the end and before we get to the back to the composite sketch, that there's an interesting rabbinic machloket, an interesting rabbinic disagreement about whether Moses did the right thing by looking away or not.
Oh, yeah.
And there's one opinion that says, yes, of course he did the right thing because, and then there are scriptural verses to prove that Moses did the right thing, and rabbinic verses, rabbinic stories to prove that he merited, because he looked away, he merited seeing later on what nobody else could see, which was is described in the book of Numbers. And so there's one story that says, or one opinion that says, of course he did the right thing, but the other one says, no, he did the wrong thing. And there is a time later on when Moses says actually to God, after the golden calf, let me just see your face. Let me just see you. And then, according to this other opinion, God says to Moses, oh yeah, well, you know, you had your moment. You had a chance.
Yeah.
I was right there in front of you, and you blew it. So there are these two stories. Did Amichai know these stories? In some deep way, I want to say he did, and by deep, I don't mean to be mysterious about literature, but he did love the Agadah. He did love the anthologies. He loved and had on his shelf so many of them. He might have encountered it, or he might have heard it somehow. In some way, his wife tells me, I never had a chance to meet him, but his wife tells me that he was a sponge for this material, and that he loved this material. And this is too fantastic. This is too extraordinary that there is a story, a machloket, that gives us an insight into the rabbinic imagination. How much attention do you want to pay to whether Moses did the right or the wrong thing? Is this told by rabbis who wish they were poets, who wish they were Amichai, who wish that they had the capacity to say about themselves, oh, this is my search, and I feel like I would have second-guessed myself. I feel like I would have been second-guessing myself if I looked, or in retrospect, no, I think I did the right thing by looking away, or I did the wrong thing by looking away. That's already amazing and touching to think that there are people who probe the biblical stories in that kind of way. But for Amichai's purpose, he says, as he makes a break from one century to another, he made himself a composite sketch, a klasteron. The machloket, the rabbinic disagreement that I'm talking about, talks about God's face in that story as klaster panav. Klaster. It's no accident that the word klasteron means a face sketch. Klaster comes from the Greek, and it's one of the words that means face, and the carved face, perhaps in particular, the etched face, the face that is materially formed. Klaster panav. And here Amichai uses this word klasteron, which reaches into that rabbinic literature and grabs it by the collar and drags it into the poem. He made himself a klasteron from the face of God, from the burning bush, from the face of Pharaoh's daughter who leaned over him when he was an infant in the basket. And of course, as Harold says, this is a doomed project. Why? Because it's his screen image. He can't describe it any more than he can etch it or draw it or make it out of gold or whatever other ways he might try to fabricate it. He distributes his drawing, but no one had seen and no one recognized. And only at the end of his life on Mount Nebo did he see and die by a kiss from the face of God. Mount Nebo, some of you have been to the site that is associated with Mount Nebo in Jordan, yes?
Yes, Eric took us there.
Yeah, was it clear when you went?
Yes.
You could see?
Yeah.
You could.
You're lucky. Most people go and don't get to see much except fog. Yeah, I didn't get to. I didn't see terribly much. What did it look like?
Well, you could look at the screensaver on my computer. Yeah, no, I mean, you could see in every direction. I mean, you had a real 360. You could see everything probably within 40, 50 miles.
Extraordinary. A way of giving the story place.
Okay.
On another mountain. He began on a mountain and he ends on a mountain, and this is where the epic comes to a close. Only at the end, the last rock, that is to say, the last only, Bernie, and only at the end of his life on Mount Nebo did he see and die by a kiss from the face of God. Bringing us back to the geography of the story, not superficial again, but to the surface of the story and another mountaintop. How about this? He died by a kiss from the face of God.
Could this is Debbie.
Hi, Debbie.
Could it be the benevolent affection of God that Moses had felt when he first encountered the burning bush and looking for that personal warmth of attachment that God had for him? Maybe he was looking for that, and that fits with the kiss from God.
It certainly could, and to some of the images that that other folks have brought up about the intimacy of Pharaoh's daughter, the face of the woman, the face of the mother, the face of tenderness, the face of the kind of commitment that comes from the heroic stance taken by Pharaoh's daughter. God's face is not complete unless those faces are all a part of the face. And is it possible that he's now feeling something, sensing something that he's needed all along, and that his life was incomplete until he had sensed it once again, and he couldn't create it and he couldn't shape it. Now, the Torah
and
tells
nobody
us,
could recognize it.
and nobody could recognize it. Nobody could recognize it for him. He was the only one who could recognize it, and we could say that's because it was his.
Rabbi,
Personal.
Yes.
the translation by Hannah Block of that last line is different from yours. She says, on Mount Nebo did Moses see and die, kissing the face of God.
Ooh.
Rather than by a kiss from the face of God.
Yeah. Well, because she's a better Hebraist than I am, she felt comfortable being less literal. And I think
What did the Hebrews say?
I can't move my cursor far enough back to be able to see the last line of the Hebrew, but somebody who has it, does somebody have it up? Or no, you probably have the same thing that I have.
I have it.
Okay.
With the kiss.
Say it again.
It's been shot with the kiss is how I would.
Yeah, it says Binishikat
Okay.
Panay.
Yeah, okay, now thank you. Thank you.
Shika could be two things.
Yeah?
That is a kiss and it's kissing because it's gerund.
Yes, it's a gerund.
Like any verb in that binyan can be, it's a gerund. That so neshika is the kissing and it's a kiss. So
Okay. Yes. So
nice.
This great Hebraist, Hannah Bloch, and a great devotee of Amichai, is more facile than I am with these things. I had in mind, and also somehow less tied to the rabbinic text a little bit. The rabbinic text says that God kissed him. So to die from a kiss, by a kiss from the face of God, is more loyal to the rabbinic text, the way that I understand it. And so translators take their risks, you know. But she has her own pedagogy and her own ways of doing it. But because the rabbinic stories about the death of Moses will say that, or do say that God kissed Moses, I was more comfortable with this. But thanks for calling attention to that. That's another level of reading poetry which is delicious and not fattening. And I recommend it to you. How much time are we done?
Well,
Okay.
that's what poetry does. You can read it more than one way. So.
Yes, absolutely.
Interesting.
Absolutely. And reading also multiple translations is its own delight.
Do you have any formal or informal published translations of Amichai poems?
Well, some of them have been used in various Hartman internal publications for them and for their various institutes and rabbinic projects and so on.
But it would be great, if not a violation of copyright laws, for you to gather together. I mean, there are dozens of Amichai poems we've seen over the years with your translations. I mean,
yeah,
I love your translations.
It's true, and there are formidable copyright issues, I think, but it might be possible still to set some of those aside, or to figure out a way of. There's some folks who are working on it, so stay tuned.
Or to gather together some old Yom Kippur pre-Mincha handouts.
Yes, that's right. And just put them out there. Get one of our granddaughters to make a cover for it or something. And I think as long as you use old-fashioned staples, either in the corner or maybe a three-ring binder, the copyright people stay away from you, because you haven't got very very deep pockets. So in any event, there's a kiss, and the kiss comes from rabbinic literature. It does not come from the Bible. He does, of course, die at the end of Deuteronomy. Moses does. And it is al pnei ha-Elohim. It is, well, al pnei Elohim means in the presence of God, that he died in the presence of God. But the rabbinic literature has a different thing in mind and wants to insist that al pnei Elohim means literally on the face of God. That's where they get the kiss from. The kiss is not in the biblical literature at all, but it is in the rabbinic literature, and it's the need for that kind of intimacy that's felt by the rabbinic interpreters, that's felt by all the generations that have read this and read it without question, or read it and embellished it. It's felt by the generation of the great poets like Amichai, who has taken that image from the rabbis and made it his own. And people who read this poem don't even know that it is a rabbinic image unless they investigate it a little bit. Perhaps it seems a little bit craggy. Perhaps it seems a little bit abrupt to use a phrase like that, by a kiss from the face of God. Maybe it makes a person scratch her head over why that image comes. And that's what prompts one of the great personal searches, which is to say, what does this story actually mean to me?
Rabbi, it's Mary Joan. It seems very real to me, because all through the poem, Moses has this passion to repeat the experience of God's face. And yet, I think we pretty much believe that it says in the Bible somewhere, you can't see God's face and live. So
Yes.
He still wants the experience, no matter what. He wants the experience. And finally, when God tells him to ascend the mountain, he's going to his loved one. Like, he loves God so much, and God loves him so much, that it seems very real to me that they could have the kiss, and then Moses is gone.
Yes, indeed. And so all of this becomes, as it's supposed to, one extraordinary story. Let me back up for just a second and acknowledge the presence of my teacher, Norman Newberg, whom I saw sitting next to Adina. She is the Hebraist who was able to tell us about gerunds and how it is that we straddle between what I have to say and what Hannah Bloch has to say. And sitting right next to her is my teacher, Norman Newberg, who I think, when it comes to it, really the greatest, most important of my teachers, who taught an extraordinary course in his living room years ago. He was an adjunct at the RRC, a course called Modern Midrash, which got my attention because I loved the word Midrash and I loved what I thought Midrash was and really had very little idea. That course went on for a couple of semesters and then went on for the next 40 years. And among the glosses on rabbinic literature that I learned from Norman, and he didn't really think about, or we didn't talk about it as being a gloss on rabbinic literature, but was what I have in mind is the teachings of Carl Rogers, and the teachings of Bruno Bettelheim, and I could go on and name people who are in a constellation around certain ways of imaginative thinking, Carl Jung, and many others, but certainly when I mention Carl Rogers, Norman comes to mind, and I had him in mind even before I knew he was on the screen. So there he is, and it's thanks to him in very large part that this is all, for me, one extraordinary story. And I hope for you, and that you get a chance to see just what Amichai is hoping for. You can find an interview with him in an old interview in the Paris Review. I don't remember the year of it, but in this interview, he'll say very pointedly that the inner and the outer are the epic, and that they are the same, and that the poet's job is to turn the outer search into the inner search, and the inner search into the outer search. So this is in some ways my search. Perhaps you'll find your own search in it. And yet we are steeled by and strengthened by the fact that we're not making history even as we make history by having this as being an unfolding story that's never unfolded before, because here it is inscribed for us. With a certain amount of detail and illuminated with a lot of love and tenderness, and with the searches of lots of generations. Well, we'll call an end to this now, and we'll continue the theme, perhaps with Amichai, but who knows? Maybe with someone else. Stay tuned. And thank you, everybody.
Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
My great pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great to see all of you.
Thank you.
I haven't forgotten to call